right, so I'm going to share my screen, and the first thing that I'm going to show everyone, and if I do pause from time to time, it's just to let people in from the waiting room, so please excuse me for that. What I am going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I am hoping that you are all seeing the SSELA login page. So if you are familiar with SSELA and with the integrated and enhanced SSELA, you realize that over the last year and a half or so, we've begun to transition away from what was called SSELA Classic. That was the old model where districts received a single login, they received a single password. It was an older structure, and so we were not able to upload all the resources that we wanted to. And so beginning last year, we began the migration over to the new enhanced integrated SSELA curriculum. So when you go to SSELA now, you'll notice that no longer is SSELA Classic even an option. It does still exist as a repository of all those good resources that were there. We've migrated most of the ones of value over to the new platform. But what you'll do is you go in. Now, if you haven't signed in since mid-July or so, you are going to be prompted to verify your email address again. And that's just to make sure that, all of us have our current information in the system. So you go ahead in, you enter in your email address, you enter in your password, and then you would go to sign in. If you do not have an account with SSELA, an individualized account, what you would do is you would go down here to click to register, you would follow the prompts, and then that would eventually register for you for full access to the platform. Once you go ahead and sign in, it takes you to our landing page. A couple of resources to point out before we even jump into any of the grade levels. Our online learning tab, for those of you that are familiar with our mini units that myself and Donna and Nancy McGuire and Linda Brandon developed last spring, the online learning tab and those mini units are still available. And we do encourage you to use them to augment what's already in SSELA. They are certainly not meant to replace it. But if you are looking for, stimuli, documents, think DBQ style questions or CRQ style questions that you want to put out to students that are available in a way that's, technologically friendly. They are in here. You can go ahead down and find 2 mini units. One of them is on technology impacting our relationship with the environment. And then the other one is connecting current events to key ideas, looking specifically at things related to the pandemic. So Donna, I don't know did you want to speak about some of the resources embedded in these? I got you, you're unmuted.
Yeah, there are a lot of different kinds of things there. People requested having books and websites that they could go to look at things. I have curated an additional list that I'm going to send to Greg that relates to things like westward expansion and Black Indians in the West, towns that were developed that were primarily Black towns like Nicodemus that people may not know about. But the list there and the resources there are to enhance your background and or are tools that can be used with kids. Some of them are picture books, but that you may not have background information on that might be useful to you. So when I work on these things, I'm looking for things that will help you work with kids.
And most likely those resources will probably find their home in 2 places. As we think about making SSELA more virtually friendly, part of the challenge oftentimes, besides doing a complete revision, basically on Zoom or by phone, which is what we've done as a team this summer, is to also think about where they live and also make those most accessible to teachers. And so you'll probably find Donna's list eventually under the online resources tab, and then we'll put it into the curriculum over time and kind of plug it into the most appropriate places. It'll also be linked in our next listserv email, as will the recording for this webinar and the other webinars that we're offering. I also do want to mention that we will be offering ongoing monthly webinars on topics that you as teachers and as subscribers recommend. So when I include my contact information at the end and Donna includes hers, we would really encourage you to reach out if there's a particular topic or challenge or pedagogical approach that you want to explore further in a professional space with teachers from across the state and with the SSELA team. We're going to be looking to you in terms of what we are going to offer going forward in terms of professional learning opportunities. So I'm going to back out of this and return back to the website. And so again, as we think about how we access the curriculum on here, our grade level bands are located up top here, 6, 7, and 8. So we'll jump into grade 8. I understand that oftentimes we as secondary teachers, I was a longtime social studies and special education teacher, grade 7, my usage of SSELA looked a little different than a lot of our elementary contemporaries. Oftentimes they will follow it more on a day-to-day basis, and some of you may do that with SSELA. I oftentimes utilized SSELA as a place to go for resources. So just to kind of remind everybody about where the resources can be found, SSELA is broken down into units, which are these large chunks of history. In this case, 8th grade going from the Civil War or end of Civil War, depending on how your district separates it, all the way up to current events. So you click into the unit. There are introductions and videos available for each unit. We have our enduring understandings and our essential questions, which drive our thought process going forward. And then again, within each unit, we have these lessons. You click on an individual lesson, and then it gives you access to the activities and procedures, which are really your lesson plans broken down on a day-to-day basis. Resources and materials are located in the collapsing tab underneath, separated into teacher materials, student handouts, and teacher reference materials, as well as videos. And then as we think about if we're fortunate enough to be in a team experience, this is a great opportunity with the ELA teacher that you work with or collaborate with to talk a little bit about where the social studies framework is touched in the work in terms of social studies and what you're doing, where the standards, key ideas, and specifically the practices are. And then looking with the practices, right? This is what New York State wants us to have students do with the information that we give them, looking at that overlap with the ELA standards and thinking about ways as we find our time stretched this year, how we can overlap with our ELA counterparts and really practice those same skills. The practices for social studies in the framework, they correspond so closely with the ELA Next Gen standards. They're oftentimes called something different, but in reality, they really do exist side by side, or they really are the same exact practices or skills. And we do know, right, that students do develop skills better when they see multiple places where they can plug them into their learning experience. So we're going to jump out of this for a second and just preview for you the social justice mini unit that we're working on. And so our social justice mini unit, which again should be released, if not by next week, probably the week after. Social justice is certainly an important issue, but we do want to develop those relationships and connections with students before jumping into something where students are going to have some vulnerability, and you as a teacher are also going to have some vulnerability. Right now, our focus is on the very broad topic of us, them, and we. How do we treat each other? And how do we build community? And so again, thinking about this as a great kind of connecting point towards the beginning of the year and thinking about ways of giving students the opportunity to explore and unpack what's going on while still connecting it to the respective frameworks within 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. You could do this, as a full review. If you're an 8th grade teacher and you want to connect back to 6th grade and 7th grade, you can certainly do that, or you can pick and choose the different resources that are available within here. And Donna is also in the process, and you'll see some of it in this working document. Donna's in the process of, again, curating lots of extra resources and jumping off points. So, if you capture your students' attention and they really feel connected to issues around social justice or equity or community, there's going to be a lot of different ways that you could utilize this throughout the course of the entire year. We have the key ideas right here. aligned by grade line. We have the opportunities to address the ELA learning standards in here. So again, a great place to connect with your ELA counterparts if you're in a teamed approach and talk about how you can work in conjunction to best use your time and provide an experience for students. We have our driving overall questions. Everything's going to be color coded. Now, when we do release this eventually, it will be not in a Google Doc, but it will be in a PowerPoint format because the feedback we received was that PowerPoint or Google Slides was easier for people to toggle through. And so it'll be in that kind of slide by slide, grade by grade breakdown. Grade 6 is going to deal with universal human rights. The links that we've included in here are interactive. So starting off with looking at and thinking about how sixth grade is a global exploration, specifically looking at the Eastern Hemisphere, and then in the second half, looking at the Western Hemisphere, specifically Europe, thinking about that overarching idea of human rights and what human rights looks like, thinking about how the historical events that they're going to learn about ultimately will influence, human rights and what we consider to be human rights today. So a dive into the UN Declaration of Human Rights with videos embedded within the document so that students can explore and can get a deeper understanding beyond just reading it. And then looking, right, because sixth grade, key idea one looks really at geography, looking at maps and looking at things like world poverty. Again, this is an interactive link where students will be able to access this map, play with it, look at it, pull information out of it, looking at issues of literacy, looking at issues of food insecurity and how those issues are playing out across the globe. And then we're in the process of choosing a couple of case studies from around the world of specific people, of specific human rights issues, and exploring those further at the sixth grade level. So some contemporary examples so that as you go and you jump back into ancient civilizations, you can draw students' connections to the contemporary as well. Anything to add there, Donna?
One thing I would add in sixth grade, at the end of that geography unit in the framework, it talks about current events and looking at 3 different regions across the world. I think there are places where you can make connection there. Also, I think there are places within the framework moving forward beyond that where connection can be made. Because if you look at the Greeks or the Romans, possibly the Chinese, they look at others as barbarians or outsiders. So how do they deal with outsiders? So you can look at that issue of us, them, we, even in the ancient societies. It might take a little tweaking, but I think it can be done.
And I think it's so important, and thanks for bringing that up, Donna, as we think about the fact that students are going to find themselves, whether we're in a virtual space or even if we're full in the classroom, the experience is going to be so different and so siloed for students. Having those connections to the bigger, broader world, we as social studies teachers are the custodians of helping students make sense of what's happening around them in current events in real time. And that's a great way to kind of say, the world is a bigger place. Yes, we're in this experience. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, we are feeling uncomfortable or disconnected from others, but there's other things going on around us, and making those issues real and showing them how they're occurring in real time is really, really important. For grade 7, we're going to transition and we're going to look at, a legacy of injustice. As we think about the systemic structures within the United States, which disproportionately affect certain groups of people, that's always a topic that, as a 7th grade teacher, I found to be critical to unpack with students. And I know that most of you probably also share that thought process. But looking at, just from a very kind of surface level, specific groups of people that have seen their way of life, that have seen their lives in general threatened by the systems and structures that we have around us. So Native American land cessions, again, an illustrated map links out to the map, looking at the way that land was taken away from the Native Americans over the course of the first half of US history. looking at the African slave trade, looking at chattel slavery, and thinking about how many of the issues that we see, and again, systemic injustices that exist today, do date back to slavery. And again, connecting that for students, giving students an idea of the scope of this. And many of you may be familiar with this map, which actually, if students access it, they can actually click on the individual dots, which show the individual slave ships leaving Africa, coming over to South America, Mesoamerica, and over to the American colonies, and then over to the early United States. And there's follow-up questions for all of these. And many of the questions are left open so that students can also, connect to their own prior knowledge, but also give their thoughts, and also address what they think could be done to bring resolution, or how these things still impact groups of people today. Irish need not apply. This is from the 1850s, and this links to a New York Times article which explains where that came from. Great opportunity, again, to talk about how different groups of immigrants throughout our country's history have faced challenges and barriers and legal barriers, and we'll look at that when we get to 8th grade as well. And then for the 4th document here, looking at the experience of women within the United States with an excerpt from the Seneca Falls Convention. So this is all in draft form. Again, when we give you our contact information at the end, if there's a particular topic or document that you would like to see included, can't make any promises, but we certainly would take it into consideration, and we'll share our information at the end, because this is a collaborative effort across the 10,000 or so educators in the SSELA community. Going to 8th grade. 8th grade, we designed the documents a little bit as pairings. So if you want to think about a CRQ at the high school level, where students are asked to not only interpret information, but also interpret relationships between documents. And again, it's a little different. It's not going to be necessarily as sophisticated as what you would see at a CRQ at the high school level, but just having students draw historical and contemporary comparisons and pairing two images together and allowing students to unpack the information, embedding background information in there, but really saying to students, we want to hear what you're seeing and what you're thinking and where you're seeing those connections. So pairing the Selma March with a Black Lives Matter image, what do you see here? What's driving this? What's different about these two images? What's the issue that maybe connects these two images? What do you think needs to be done in order to bring resolution to this? Going down to the next one, a speech from Cesar Chavez, the very famous "We Shall Overcome" speech from 1965, talking about the plight of immigrant workers, and then connecting that to the contemporary workers' movements that we're seeing today in places like Amazon and Target. So not only connecting immigrants' rights, but also looking at the rights of workers, who are demanding certain things like fair pay. Looking at the experience of Native Americans in the latter half of the 19th century into the 20th century and now into the 21st century, the American Indian boarding schools. Many of you do also touch on this in 7th grade when you think about the Cherokee and the projects of assimilation, and how they were told if they assimilated into American culture, they would not be forced to move, and then they were subsequently forced to move. But great opportunities to delve in what it means to be an American, how our cultures fit into that, and how we can retain and hold on to personal culture and still be a part of the fabric of the United States, how it doesn't mean that we should have to surrender our identities and who we are and our languages and our belief systems. And then that's paired with Standing Rock, which gets into things like continuing, Amerindian rights, land rights, and the rights of indigenous people. And as many of you are certainly probably familiar, this is an ongoing issue. If we think about, the court rulings in Oklahoma, which could potentially shift a lot of land that had been taken away from tribes across the United States back into their control and possession, this is certainly going to be a driving issue going forward. So things that we certainly need to touch on, things that are multiple places within our curriculums, but also connect really strongly to contemporary events. Donna, anything you want to add?
Couple of things.
Sure, please.
One is there are Standing Rock documents, political cartoons and other things in the environmental tech mini project or mini unit. So if you go back to that online learning piece, there are things in there that you may see that you want to use. As Greg said, the documents can be used in ways that you think are appropriate for you. These are tools for you. Other things that I'm thinking about in terms of curating materials include things like separate is never equal, and the Sylvia Mendez case, and Mexican Americans not being able to attend integrated schools. So school segregation for Mexican Americans in the 1940s period post-World War II. Angel Island information related to immigration, which is a different immigration experience than the experience through Ellis. Other things related to Native Americans and boarding schools and treatment. Those are kinds of things that we're playing around with. Where we end up, I don't know, but if you have ideas and suggestions, I'm open to that. But really trying to take a wider view, and other places where you can post hole on diversity. We're also looking at some other kinds of things for the Asian or Asian Pacific group. And I recently found an e-comic book that has some really cool things in it. And I'm looking at that to see if there are places in there that might be post holes for people. So.
And just to build off of that, the last paired document we have has the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then thinking about, how coronavirus has been, linked, and the racism that Chinese Americans and Asian Americans in general have faced as a result of that. Again, pairing these documents together, it really does hit on the skill set that is expected with the CRQs to be able to interpret multiple documents and look at some sort of relationship or connection between them. Again, this is very base level. It's not certainly at the high school standard or what's expected on the 10th grade or 11th grade regions, but it's something that we want to start to explore with students and have them begin to think about. The culminating task for this, which is being worked on in the background, is going to be based on action civics, which is certainly something that New York State is focusing on as we think about the fact that New York State is planning in the next few years to offer a civic seal for the regions and an alternate pathway around civics. We really want students to operationalize their learning and to put into practice and into play what we would like to call solution-based learning. So, we oftentimes think about problem-based learning, but we want to empower our young people. When we think about the issues in this country, the disenfranchisement that we still see with such large portions of our population, we want students to be able to recognize an issue, think about things that are impacting other people or impacting themselves, come up with a coherent plan of action, and then, if circumstances allow, operationalize that plan, whether that's reaching out to government officials, whether that's actually going out and doing volunteer work in order to improve the plight of other people, whether that's voicing their opinion safely and legally in a protest. I mean, these are all things that are safeguarded and are kind of core to us as a country, and we want our students to be aware of them. And so that's going to be the culminating activity here, and again, completely optional, but having students think about an issue that they came across in this mini unit, or something that they're going to delve into further detail in the year, and then take action, or at least make a proposal about how they could bring about change. And that fits right into the practices, it fits right into the standards, and it fits right into the content. So it hits all three of those boxes for social studies, and that's a high quality task. So again, this will be coming out we're hoping, right, by either the end of next week or the beginning of the following week. But there will be a listserv email that will go out. It'll have this embedded in here. This will be offered under the online tab. And then, as I said, all the recordings for all of these webinars will also be listed within that next listserv email. So the final thing we wanted to share with you, because we are coming up on half an hour, one of the questions we get most specifically from middle school teachers is, as I find myself in this space, maybe in the past I've been driven by content. Maybe I've been too reliant on memorization for students. How am I going to chart student growth over time? And something that I certainly believe in, and Donna will be able to speak to as well, is the idea that the practices are so critical. The idea of what skills do we need in order to understand social studies content, in order to make sense of the standards. Because remember, the standards are not what we teach. They're the lenses that we ask students to look through as they explore the content, as they try to make sense of what's being presented to them. And then ultimately, what we also try to do is build those skills. And the practices do not only work for social studies, they're in ELA, they're in math, they're in science. It's those critical thinking skills and application skills. So I'm going to share with all of you right now in the chat a document. And this is a document that we can't take credit for. It's a state document. But what we did do is we did curate this document. We curated a document that is available on the state website. This has all 6 social studies practices on it. We call it the crosswalk, and it has what those practices are supposed to look like on a grade by grade basis. So I'm going to share this in the chat right now with all of you so you will have access to it. And if you're thinking about ways to look at student skill development in an unusual space, you can measure skill development in a way that, I don't know if I can give a test where it's basic recall, because now I think students can go and Google answers, which they might do. This is different. This also gives students actionable feedback, and it shows them where they are in terms of their development. So let me bring the screen in a little bit. Each page in this document that I just shared with you is its own separate practice. So we'll look at the first one, gathering, interpreting, and using evidence. You'll notice along the top, all of our grade levels, K through 9 through 12, because 9 through 12, the state just batches them into those 4 years into one box. Let's say you're a 7th grade teacher and you want to look at developing a lesson where you're going to have students gather, interpret, and using evidence. We do that on a daily basis in our social studies classrooms. We do it implicitly, but let's say you want to do it explicitly. You really want to focus in on this. Maybe you're going to use one of the documents from the mini unit that we just showed you, and you really want students to do a deep, deep dive into it. And maybe you're going to even develop your own essay as the jumping off point afterwards, where you're going to have them generate some of their thoughts or put it down. What you could do is you could say, all right, so what aspects of gathering, interpreting, and using evidence do I want students to do? Because there's multiple subcomponents. This 7th grade band right here is what the state expects a 7th grader to be able to do. That means that they're at grade level. So that could be the starting point for your rubric. You could put at the top, at grade level, or expectation, or the standard, or whatever you wanted to call it. 6th grade, you could copy and paste this and rename this as approaching. 8th grade, you could put as exceeding. And what you can do is you can have a student generate their answer, and you can literally go through and look at these different subcomponents of this and circle where a student's at. And then on the very bottom, offer some directed actionable feedback. Because one of the things that we found, at least in our experience here at Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES, is in this environment, offering students multiple experiences and multiple opportunities to improve their work in a virtual space makes them feel more connected to their teacher. It also makes them feel more connected to their class. And so again, this is not a be-all, end-all, but this is certainly one way that you could chart over time student achievement and look at it in real time and give students direct actionable feedback. Anything to add to that, Donna?
The PLDs for grade 10 and grade 11 at the high school level offer similar kinds of experiences, more broken out, so that you might be able to look at how well they're gathering evidence in a specific way. You can also, those are available online, and you can look at those on the assessment webpage. That's something that you could also adapt to make it work with this crosswalk that we have here at PNW BOCES. That is a state document. So those two things in combination may help you really tease out at what level kids are doing the work.
And that's a great point. And again, Donna makes a good point. I think sometimes we think of the state website as being difficult to navigate or unwieldy, but certainly there are many resources, whether you're on the actual state website or whether you're going on to Engage New York. The C3 documents and C3 inquiries that are contained in there are another terrific resource in terms of getting students into looking at documents and doing those practices explicitly. So certainly don't be afraid to go and look at the resources that we share, and then look at the state and kind of draw from both. So that sums up our presentation this morning. We're going to open it up to questions. I'm going to drop into the chat right now my email address. And certainly if you have any follow-up questions or follow-up thoughts, we would be very happy to hear from you. And if it's not directly related to what you saw today, but you're thinking down the road, there's a particular topic that you'd like us to handle in a webinar, maybe you'd like to hear more about those different resources that Donna was talking about, or how you could turnkey different types of texts into the curriculum, that would be great as well. I'm also going to share Jessica Biale's email address. If you ever have any kind of technical questions or technical issues with the website, Jessica is also an extremely important and valued member of our team. If you've ever called SSELA and not spoken to myself or Dr. Brown, who was previously in the role, Jessica is probably the person that you spoke to as well, and certainly somebody who is available to assist you in any way possible. So if anyone has any questions, we'll take about 30 seconds right now to just kind of open it up. You can pose it in the chat if you like, or you can unmute yourself. And then if not, we just wish all of you a very happy Labor Day weekend and a very successful start to the school year. And be kind to yourselves, right? We're all first-year teachers, right? The spring was not our first foray into what we find ourselves in. That was triage. That was, real time building the airplane as it was taking off. I think now we kind of find ourselves or building the airplane as we're rolling down the runway. So just be kind to yourselves, because you are first-year teachers in this experience, and certainly, practice self-care, and also just feel free to reach out to us. We don't have all the answers, but we're always willing to be thought partners, and we're always willing to support your learning needs and your students' learning needs in any way possible. All right, so it looks like we don't have any questions, but we wish you all a wonderful weekend.